I think stereotypes are just fears that keep us from trusting and connecting and being honest with ourselves and the things around us, you know.
Hi all, I'll say hello in English so Elie knows what I'm saying about her. I'm Cristi Lupșa and I'm from Dor, and I'm very happy to be here. This is a great excuse to come back to my hometown. If my family wants me here more often, then you should organize more events here, because then I'll make it back more often. Before I introduce Elie, I just want to say thank you to all of you, and especially Cipri, who's not here, and Mircea. Lateral has been tremendously helpful in everything we've done at Dor, and especially everything we've done at the Power of Storytelling Conference, which is what is bringing us here today. And I just wanted to put there on the screen, this is the latest thing we've done together. This is the T-shirt that we gave to people at the conference last weekend. I think some of you were there. I think some of you were there in previous years, and I hope some of you will be there the next years. This is a 2-day storytelling conference that brings some of the best storytellers in the world to Bucharest. And by the second day, I think a third of the room were wearing this, proudly wearing this T-shirt. And as I was saying at the conference, I run into people on the street in Bucharest wearing Lateral T-shirt, whether from the conference this year or the conference the years before. So thank you for that. Your work is deeply appreciated, and I'm very happy to be here. So this being said, I'll just move on to introducing Elie. I've known Elie Gardner for 13 years now. We met when I was in grad school at the University of Missouri, so when I went to study in the States, and she was studying photography, and we met because we worked on a story together. I wrote about a young Muslim activist, a student, and Elie took the pictures, followed her around for, I think, a couple of months, took some absolutely amazing intimate portraits of Rehab, and unfortunately Rehab passed away a few years ago, and if you search for Rehab's name on Google, most of everything that pops up are photos done by Elie. And after she graduated from school, she worked in St. Louis as a multimedia editor and a photographer. And then, like some of us maybe dreamed to do, she moved to Lima, Peru, and lived there for a few years, was a filmmaker, a freelancer, a photographer, pretty much did everything she needed to do to, make a living there. Then she moved to Istanbul in Turkey, where she did pretty much the same thing, freelanced for a lot of international outlets, worked for NGOs, photographed, did film. And she covered mostly education, women's rights, and immigration. And if you've not been at the conference, and since you do have the opportunity for a Q&A, one of those immigration stories changed Elie's life. So if she's not going to mention it, then do ask her during the Q&A, Elie, what is the story that changed your life? And her work has been published in the New York Times, but it's been shown by Al Jazeera, Der Spiegel, and today she's gonna talk to us a little bit about how she's discovered the sort of the magic of cell phone photography and how it can bring, how it can create sometimes more intimacy than the big DSLRs that are that the photographers are usually chasing us around with. That being said, thank you again and welcome, Elie Gardner.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you, Christian, for that wonderful introduction. I'm incredibly impressed with the space you guys have here, and I'm really comfortable talking to you all, but these cameras is kind of a new thing, so I'm a little bit more stage fright, I think, with all this technology pointing at me. But I will brave through this, and we'll do this together. So like Christian said, I'm going to focus today on basically my journey with cell phone photography, how I started to take pictures with my cell phone, how it became important important to me, and also a little bit about how it actually influenced the professional work that I earn my income from and make my living. I'll offer some technical tips, but in this crowd, I actually think that you guys could give me a lot more technical tips that I can give you. So we'll do that part maybe as a bit more of a quick review than I do with most groups. So, as I said, we're here to talk about cell phone photography. As Christy mentioned, I studied photojournalism, and after graduating from the university, I got a job at a newspaper. I was there for 4 years, and I worked as both an editor and as a staff photographer. And at this time, I didn't have a smartphone. So I was taking pictures almost every day, or at least 5 days a week, sometimes 3 assignments a day. But it was a professional rhythm. It was sometimes a cool story, but a lot of times just work. A picture to turn in by the deadline so that the paper can come out the next day. And in December 2010, I moved to Lima, Peru to freelance. And suddenly I wasn't taking as many pictures. I was in a new place. I didn't have assignments. I was worried about paying my rent. And really the only thing I was feeling that I was good at this time was taking pictures with my very first smartphone. So when I moved to Lima, Peru, I got a BlackBerry, which I don't know if any of you had, but the camera was less than desirable. But this was my way to take pictures every day, and this was my way to do something that I was familiar with, and also satisfy my family, particularly my mom back home, when she asked, what is Peru like? What are you eating? What is your life like? So I would send pictures of my daily life in Lima, Peru, taken with my BlackBerry, to my family, while I was trying to figure out how to make it as a freelancer in a place like Lima, Peru. So it started, as I mentioned, with the BlackBerry and taking pictures of my everyday life. If you look really close at the screen, you'll see these are extremely low-res pictures. But every journey begins somewhere, and this is where mine began. At the beginning, I took a lot of pictures of coffee and food, inanimate objects. It didn't really look anything like the pictures I was taking with a big camera like this at the newspaper in Missouri. But I was having fun. One day I was walking in the park. This moment, I didn't select this picture because it's one of my favorite pictures I took at the time, but I had a revelation when I took this picture with my cell phone. And that was, I was sitting there eating my cake and drinking my coffee, and I turned and took this picture of this couple, and I realized they had no idea I took the picture. And literally the expression that we use as photographers sometimes is we try to be flies on the wall and not influence situations. And actually I had done that with this phone. Part of me felt a bit naughty, like I had stolen something from them, or that I was a voyeur or a paparazzi, kind of invading this moment of theirs at the cafe. But then another part of me realized this is exactly what I always strive to do as a photographer. So it was a mixed moment, but it was a revelation that made me realize that I could very quickly make pictures with little obtrusion with my cell phone that I couldn't make with a camera. If I had been sitting at this table with a giant camera, this couple would have noticed me. I can say 99% chance, just the way I noticed these cameras in front of me right now, this couple would have noticed my camera, maybe held a menu in front of their face, asked me not to take a picture. Who knows, maybe they would have posed for the picture, but they probably would have noticed it. Here's just a few more early pictures that I took with the BlackBerry. And I chose this picture because another revelation I had in taking pictures with the BlackBerry is I would take my camera to more places than I would take my big SLR. So I would find myself in a canoe where maybe I wouldn't feel comfortable taking my camera and risking it going in the water, but okay, if I lose my BlackBerry, I can handle replacing that. So I kind of started thinking of it as, and this isn't my original words, but one that I believe in is that, you know, the best camera you have is the one that's with you. So the one that can record that moment that you want to freeze and share with others, and not just keep it in your memory. So those were some early BlackBerry pictures, and my parents loved them, and my family liked seeing Peru. Instagram had been around a little while at this time, and I decided if my mom liked my pictures, that maybe the whole world would also like my pictures. That's maybe a giant leap, but then that idea caused me to start my first and only Instagram account. I say it like I have many Instagram accounts, but I only have one. And if you scroll back through my feed, you'll find this is the first picture I ever published. October 25th, 2012. So
almost exactly 5 years ago. So like I said, at the beginning, a lot of my pictures were like this. Inanimate objects, the things I ate, my own hand, very micro moments of my own life. And I was still kind of learning what Instagram was and how to combine pictures of people and intimate stories that I was making as a journalist, could find that way also into the Instagram space. It's like at the beginning I had separated the two. But at least I was trying, and I was sharing things and seeing what sort of response I was getting. At the time, my professional work wasn't at all like what I was doing in St. Louis at the newspaper. To make my living, I mostly ended up taking corporate portraits for a lot of businessmen and a few businesswomen in Lima, Peru. So this was nice because I was earning some income and I was able to pay my rent, but usually I was getting 5 minutes, 10 minutes to go in and make these pictures with these people. Not a lot of interaction, not a lot of relationship. And in the end, really, I didn't feel like the pictures were doing much except making the people I photographed happy, which counts as something, or pissing them off sometimes when they didn't like their picture. But beyond that, there wasn't a lot of social impact. And I became a journalist because I really felt and still believe that stories can change lives. They can influence people to change their minds about things. They can influence to have more meaningful lives. So these pictures weren't making me happy, to say the least. I missed having human connections, sitting and talking with people for a long time. And I realized that I was starting to use my cell phone to do that. So I had started by this point to quit taking pictures of my food and my hand, and I started turning my camera to the people in the world around me, much like the pictures I had taken at the newspaper in St. Louis. So I'll flip through a few of these. Sometimes these pictures were quick street moments where there was no interaction with the people I photographed. Other times they turned into long conversations where I would stop and exchange words with the people in the photographs, ask them about themselves. Around this time, I was also becoming aware of another power in cell phone photography, and that was that I could take pictures that I just simply couldn't take with the SLR. In Peru, you're in cars a lot, getting from point A to point B, especially in rural areas. And it would have been lucky for me to have my SLR ready to go at the right exposure and pointed in a direction out the car window to capture a moment. And I saw so many beautiful things on these car trips across Peru in between assignments and in between these portraits that I put together 5 or 6 photos here that were made from the window of the car. And so this ability to be ready so quickly to capture a moment, I also saw as a power. In addition to that, in these rural areas, the phone was less of an obstacle between me and the people. When you walk into a small rural village, probably anywhere in the world with a camera this size, you're going to get questions like how much did it cost? They're going to stare at it sometimes uncomfortably. Some people may have never been photographed. And so there's this thing between you and the people more than social class and understanding. There's also a physical obstacle. And so with the cell phone, I found so much acceptance in these rural areas. People didn't look at me. They didn't really notice the phone. They didn't care about the phone. They had seen a cell phone. They maybe had a cell phone. So the conversation could much more quickly become about who are you and who am I than how much my piece of equipment costs and how I must be so much richer and luckier than the people I photographed because I carried this camera. So I recognized that I also liked that a lot. Again, here's the pictures that I took out the window of a moving car. And I believe I probably maybe would have got one of these had I been shooting with an SLR, a lucky manual setting that was right and getting the lens up fast enough. So after about a year or so of taking pictures with my cell phone, I graduated from a BlackBerry to an Android, and I was starting to think there was value in these pictures of people, and that there was perhaps value in people seeing that in Lima, people shopped for fancy dresses and drove red convertibles, and people prayed, and kids needed to go to the bathroom, like the boy running to the bathroom in one of the photos I showed earlier. So around the time, I was also starting to follow an account on Instagram called Everyday Africa. And what Everyday Africa's mission was to show a different side of Africa than what the news portrayed. So instead of just showing blood diamonds and famine and these stereotypical images we see of Africa, two guys that were in the Peace Corps living in Africa decided to start sharing pictures of their everyday life, much like the things that I was doing in Lima, as a way to give context to the news. So yes, famine is happening and war is happening, but that amidst it all, there's daily life too, and there's tradition, and people dance and eat and laugh and cry, and their life might be different than ours, but there's also a lot of similarities. So me and 3 colleagues said, Latin America needs this too. Everyone thinks that Peru, everyone owns a llama and wears a poncho and lives in the mountains, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So we said, we need to start Everyday Peru. Oh no, we need to start Everyday Latin America. Let's go bigger. So we started this account called Everyday Latin America, modeled after Everyday Africa. And we emailed the founders of Everyday Africa and asked them, hey, we like your model. It's cool. Can we do it too? At the time, they had loosely coordinated also with other people like us, someone in the Middle East who wanted to start Everyday Middle East, someone in Asia who wanted to start Everyday Asia. And these 2 guys, instead of keeping this idea for themselves and franchising it and trying to make money, they said, wow, this is the best thing that could happen because we believe in this so much. Now it's resonating with other people. Let's teach them how we did it. And this project from the start has been done with no money. So it's just people who are typically professional photographers who live in a place, who really care about the place and want to get essentially the word out that there's another side to the places that we live and the places that we work than maybe what the mainstream media is offering. So we started this account. We reached out to people from all over Latin America, asking them if they'd want to contribute. Everyday Latin America is not a collection of my images or my friends' images. It's trying to be what is a very representative account of the whole continent. So the goal was always to have at least one photographer from every country, photographers from different socioeconomic classes, different backgrounds, photographers from the cities, photographers from the countries. So just trying to gather a diversity of perspectives into one place so that if you want to know about Latin America, you can come here and you can get a sense of Latin America very quickly without speaking Spanish. You know, photography is a language that you don't need to learn to understand. So this led to opportunities. We were invited to several exhibits throughout Latin America and in the US to exhibit our work, to talk about our work and our mission. And so this was one such exhibit that I got to curate in Brazil. And so the theme we decided to pick for that, and you guys can come see this at the end if you'd like, but the exhibit, if you just look at it, you might not notice. The theme is a little subtle, but it's life. And so here at the beginning, you have 2 eggs in a nest. And childhood, moments, adolescence, a first kiss, a wedding, moving on up to aging, and then finally at the end, you're left with 2 empty chairs and death. So it was a way to take all these pictures that really had no connection except the region they were in and turn them into a more thematic collection. When I moved to Istanbul, and I felt that I was a bit outside of Latin America in that region, I knew I wanted to stay involved with this everyday type of photography. And the founders of Everyday Africa had by this point talked to us and several other everyday accounts and created an account on Instagram called Everyday Everywhere. So the idea of this was to show daily life everywhere in the world from the perspective of potentially anyone who has a cell phone and internet access. So this account has a new curator every week. So every single week you have a different perspective on what is important, what picture matters, what story matters. And the pictures are selected just through the use of a hashtag. So if you take a picture today and you hashtag it every day, everywhere, then there's a chance that the curator will select your image and it will be seen by one of 205,000 followers. So that's all organic growth. We haven't paid for any followers or done any of these little pranks. But I just think this is an amazing, very democratic kind of visual experiment. And I love it. And this also has led to exhibits, just like Everyday Latin America. And so this was an exhibit I got to edit for Photo Istanbul last year, and this incorporated 27 everyday accounts. And it's quite hard to edit off of Instagram, but to actually edit this exhibit, I literally held my phone and scrolled through Instagram, 27 different feeds. Each feed had probably 1,000 pictures and made screenshots. Looked for visual relationships, ended up printing out the pictures, and you can see this is on my living room floor, but this was how we mocked up the exhibit. So a new technology that we made quite old-fashioned, but whatever works. I'm sure you guys could have come up with a technical solution to that would have been much more efficient, but you guys weren't there. So this is how the exhibit looked in person, much cooler than on my living room floor and on these papers. And I'm just going to read here the paragraph that we published as part of the introduction to the exhibit, and then I'll show a few pictures from it. As moments echo each other around the globe, we document them. We see who lives in a place, what they eat, where they play sports, when they pray, why they use umbrellas, and how they use their rooftops. Sometimes we are surprised by the similarities. Other times we notice subtle differences. The pictures we take answer some of our questions, and at the same time make us ask many more. The Everyday Projects uses photography to challenge stereotypes that distort our understanding of the world. We're creating new generations of storytellers and audiences that recognize the need for multiple perspectives in portraying the cultures that define us. So the idea with this exhibit was to really surprise people and show them pictures that they might not expect from places. So, and also find visual relationships. So these are some pairs of visual relationships that I found throughout the different feeds from the scrolling editing. And so the picture on the left you see here is actually in Istanbul, Turkey. The one on the right is in Colombia, South America. The picture on the left here is from Lebanon, and the one on the right is from Kenya. On the left is Delhi, India, and on the right is Nigeria. And this pairing was, strictly visual. This in the statement of the exhibit that moments echo each other, and literally here you have an echoing of a texture, of a color. One is a piece of art, and one is a man taking a nap, a day labor working. And just finding those visual repetitions it's like going on a treasure hunt and finding something like that. And then showing other people, I got a lot of joy from that. Here on the left is Ecuador, and on the right is Sri Lanka. So no matter the age or the place, having a little bit of fun on a playground, even if it's made for people younger than we are, can be a nice moment. So my work with the Everyday Projects in Everyday Latin America, and I say work, but it's really a hobby or a passion or a side thing. I found it starting to influence my own work. So as I mentioned in Lima, Peru, I was doing a lot of corporate portraits. I was doing all sorts of things. I was copy editing people's theses in English as a way to earn money, translating Spanish to English. But then finally I started telling some stories that were meaningful to me. And that continued in Istanbul. And by the time I got to Istanbul, I wasn't taking any more corporate portraits, which for me made me happy. And I was telling more stories. And I was telling more stories in much the same way that my cell phone photography was changing. I was telling more personal stories. I was looking for everyday moments inside the context of bigger news stories. So living in Turkey, there are 3 million Syrian refugees. And rather than going to the border and trying to tell a typical refugee story of a victim with little agency, I looked for stories of Syrian culture, of how Syrians were living in their everyday life throughout Turkey. But of course, always finding a news angle, right? To connect it back to something that is a problem, to make people care that there might not be education for Syrians in Turkey, for example, or it might be difficult for them to enter the Turkish schools because of money or because of language. And so I'll show one video here of a project I worked on in Turkey. So we profiled 3 different Syrian teenage girls, and we wanted to show the impact of war and their displacement on their education. And so this is the story of Lori.
ولما بكون عم بشتغل بفكر بغير شيء، ما بحط راسي بالشغل. لما جيت على تركيا فكرت أدرس، بس يعني ما في مجال. طبعا هون بسبب الشغل بتخيل شغلات إنه بكرة لما هيك أطلع من هذا المكان وأعزف مثلا. كان عندي أمل بالموسيقى، بعزفي على آلة الكمان. كنا نعزف أنا وبابا. أول مرة بابا صار يعطيني العلامة، قبل ما يحكي بقول له ما تحكي شو هي العلامة، أنا من صوت العلامة بدي أعرف شو هي العلامة. فلما عملت هيك بابا انبسط كتير، يعني تفاجأ فيني، حسيت إنه عن جد صار يعتبرني إنسانة كبيرة وأوعى من عمري. يعني
مشان أولادي بعت آلتي الموسيقية مشان أجيبهم لهون، هي كانت بس. حسيت لوري يعني بالمستقبل لازم تكون شيء، يعني لازم يكون لها بصمة بالحياة. بس للأسف الحرب دمر كل شيء، يعني ما شفنا شيء. هذا بحي الشيخ مقصود. كان ينزل قذائف مثلا بالشوارع، يجي علينا طلقات الرصاص مثل الحشرات تروح تجي. قذائف تجي بس مو بشكل مثل ما النهار اللي طلعنا.
نزلنا من بيتنا لأنه بيتنا طابق عالي فبيصير ضرب عليه كتير. طلعنا أنا وبابا نجيب غراضنا لحتى نطلع. كل ما بنطلع بيصير ضرب، نرجع ننزل ما بنجيب شيء. فعلى آخر لحظة قلت له لبابا أعطيني الكمان بدي إياه. قال لي ما في، خلص يعني انزلي. ونزلنا. صار لي 4 سنين ماني ماسكة كمان. يعني بتمنى انه بس امسك الكمان، بس بدي ارجع اعزف ان كانت اي شيء، لو كان علامتين، لو كان اي شيء، بس احس انه انا لساتني عم بعزف، لساتني انا بهذا المجال العظيم. بحس بالمسؤولية احيانا انه اذا ما اشتغلت يعني اهلي رح يكون وضعهم صعب.
لوري واخوها كانوا من الاوائل دائما. من بعدي بالسوق بشوف مكتبه فيها دفاتر واقلام، لما تضرب عيني عليها هذا الشيء يعني وانا ماشي لا شعوري ببكي. صار المدرسه حلم لطفل. كان ما شاف المدرسه السنه وبعد ما دخل المدرسه نهائيا، يعني بسبب الحرب والضرب. يعني
تمام. ما حسيت بالطفوله، يعني كبرت بسرعه. بحكي باسم كتير بنات وكتير أطفال وكتير شباب، ويا ريت كبرت بشكل حلو. يعني طبعا مو ذنب حدا، لا ذنب أهلي ولا ذنبي، ذنب الحرب، ذنب الواقع اللي صار. يعني
So, for those of you who couldn't see the subtitles, I didn't think about that, but it might have been a bit small, so if you weren't able to read those, just the summary of the story is when Lori's family moved to Istanbul, they needed her to work to be able to afford their rent. And so Lori, who is 15, was working in a garment factory, and this was 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week with her dad. And Lori dreamed about playing the violin. But because she was working, she would get home, she would be exhausted. In Aleppo, where she lived in Syria, she was able to study the violin and she had free time and was able to go to school. So rather than focusing on the garment factory where she worked and making that an atrocity, we focused on this teenage girl's dream to play the violin. We don't really need to tell you that the garment factory is not a good place. You can see it and decide for yourself, but we chose to focus on this story of her just wanting to play the violin and think, well, maybe that's easier to connect to for people who don't understand war, who live far away from Turkey and Syria. And after we published that story, we got tons of responses. About $3,000 was donated to the family. Someone in the UK mailed Laurie a violin. And this was wonderful and heartwarming to see. It wasn't enough to change Laurie's life entirely. It gave them some moral boost, but we actually did a follow-up story on Laurie just a few months ago, and she's still working. She has a different mentality about it, and she's taught herself English and is now trying to get better jobs. But I just wanted to share that because I think that story I might have told differently had I not started taking pictures with my cell phone and had I not been part of this everyday movement, I guess you could call it, to try to look for something more subtle and more universal within a story of war. So around the same time that that story published, I actually got commissioned, well, not commissioned, I sold pictures I took with my cell phone. So eventually the pictures I took with my cell phone turned into something that became something monetarily. And so this was a spread in a magazine in Peru. So they contacted me after I had moved to Istanbul and said, hey, we think your work on Instagram is kind of cool. Can we do an essay about Istanbul for this magazine in Peru? So I said, of course. And so here's just a quick look at how something with a cell phone, something so small, I don't know what the equivalent would be in coding or design language, but that it actually can turn into something bigger than you think when you start it. And by just committing yourself to something and an idea and putting passion into it, it can turn into a bigger opportunity than what you think in the beginning. So, tips for making better photos with your cell phones. We'll go through a few. I actually shoot with a LG Nexus 5X phone, which is extremely slow. I don't really believe it's about having the flashiest camera. It's just about knowing how your camera works. So I know my phone has an incredible delay, and I've learned the timing. It's like having an old Hasselblad camera or something. That's probably extreme, but it's just getting used to it. So it's spending time with your phone and practicing with it to get it to do what you want. And so I've used the BlackBerry and Android. I used an iPhone for a long time. Now I have this because it gives me an international SIM card with a US number that's convenient in my life right now. So, some technical tips. The first one is kind of obvious, but something that I think we often forget, which is just to be ready. So that means having space on your phone. That means making sure you don't have fingerprints on your lens, having a charged battery, having your phone out. I did a little tourist of Bucharest last week, and I missed a bunch of photos because I kept my phone in my purse rather than just in my hand. So be ready. I think really that's half the journey to getting a good photo. Then you need to be observant, because if you're ready and you don't see anything around you that's interesting, or you're not interested by anything around you, then there's nothing to photograph. Another just small technical thing is to zoom with your feet. So a lot of people use the zoom in the camera, and the technology is really good now that sometimes the picture looks really good, but you can get a much better quality file if you just take 3 steps rather than using your zoom. And then you're going to have a much bigger file to work with, and if you crop it, it's going to look better. Light is the key element to all photography, be it with a camera or a cell phone. So knowing how to use it and playing with it is something I really encourage. You can use all sorts of stuff for light. You can be creative with light. You can use things like tin foil and mirrors and shiny surfaces and these umbrellas to create light or direct light where you want it. So you don't need a fancy photographer's kit and reflectors to necessarily use light in a way you want to. So I really encourage you to play with it. I almost never use my flash on my camera. or on my cell phone. And we usually think the way to use light is to put the sun to our back so the light is shining on our subject. I think this is the most common way and often it works, but we can use light in other ways too, of course. Turning this way and having half-lit subjects, having backlit subjects, using light to make a silhouette versus an illuminated portrait. Sometimes our cameras in our phones see things differently than how our eyes see them, and this can be really cool. So pointing your phone directly at the light and seeing, does it create a lens flare like in this picture? Does it create a sensation or a feeling that you don't see with your eyes? So I think that I like to use light in the camera in the moment I'm taking the picture to achieve what I want as much as I can. A lot of people say, oh, I can add later some light. Oh, I can lighten it. And yes, you can. But I challenge you to try to do as much in your camera and not in post-production as possible. It will save you time and it's a lot more rewarding, at least for me. Here's another picture of just moving around and seeing how the light interacts with what you're photographing. I wouldn't be able to see this smoke if the light wasn't behind it. So moving around in a scene and watching how the light falls on what you want to draw your viewers' attention to and using light in a way that helps your picture, that's working with your message or your emotion rather than competing with it. This is one of those examples where I didn't see this with my eye. I saw the water that was pretty and it was sparkling, but then when I pointed my camera at it, it even enhanced that glitter. And I think actually on this one, my lens might have had a little fingerprint on it, which I told you not to have, but sometimes it works in good ways too. In addition to light, color can make or break an image. And I'm just showing a couple examples here. For instance, this picture, if the wall wasn't green and this man's vest wasn't orange, it might be an okay picture, but the color really enhances it. So looking around you for color. I really love monochromatic pictures where you see a yellow bus and someone wearing a yellow coat walks in front of it, looking for those serendipitous moments of color and contrast. Can make an image really lovely. Perspective, another word for this would just be angles, the way we take the picture. I always tell people to get on their stomach or to stand on tables and chairs, and I push people to look at things not from the standard height that we all see the world at. So if I stand here and take a picture, it's going to be the way that most of us see the world. But if I get down really low on my stomach and look up, it's going to look different than the way we normally see the world. And actually, this really attracts people. These two pictures I'm showing here are taken from airplanes. And out of all the pictures on Instagram, my most liked pictures tend to be pictures shot from airplanes. And my theory is that it's just a different perspective, because that's not the way we normally see the world, unless we're world travelers and flying all the time. People are really curious and interested in seeing things from above, things from below, things in a new and fresh way. Details are another important one, and this ties into being observant and just noticing the things around you. So slowing down and looking for things. This picture is in the Bosphorus Strait, which is in Istanbul. And when I was walking next to the water, it didn't look like this. So it just looked like dark water. I sat down with my coffee and was kind of peering into the water, and then I saw one jellyfish, 2, 3. So I just took extra time, and then when I pointed my camera at the water, I overexposed it just a little bit. And you could see this, which only happened because I stopped and sat down and took a little bit more time. Here's a wall with a shape that reminded me of a heart. So again, just looking around at these mundane, ordinary things that we're often really quick to pass by. Moments drive photographs, be it a laugh, a cry. In this case, a guy jumping out of his bumper car and a young girl screaming as she gets hit. So you have to wait for these moments. I took many, many pictures riding my bumper car, and none of them were as interesting as this. I probably took 50 images, and the other ones were just plain-faced kids in their cars. So this one was what replicated what it felt like to me to be hit over and over in a bumper car. but I had to wait for it. Moments can also be really subtle. They're not always a giant laugh or a really expressive thing, like the bumper cars. They can be really quiet moments. This was a picture I took riding a ferry. And this guy's head, I actually saw it as an obstacle. I wanted a picture of the boat passing and the sun and the water. But then he turned to the side and lifted the teacup. And suddenly he had a shape and a form that was interesting. He was no longer an annoying head in the way, but a person with a form and a shape doing something. So it can be a very subtle moment. And I always like to say too, when I talk about moment-driven photography, that humans were creatures of habit. And so if we do something once, we'll probably do it again. So I push up my glasses a lot, or if I am laughing, chances are I'm going to laugh again. So if you miss a moment, don't beat yourself up, just sit and wait. And it might not happen again, but it often does. Coincidence, patterns, lines, humor, repetition, all other things that I think make strong photos. My friend came to visit me in Lima, and it turns out her shirt had the very similar color palette to the painting on my wall, so I took it as an opportunity to make a photograph. And while single photographs are amazing, I think that anytime you can go deeper with something, it's even more interesting. So collections of pictures, stories, themes. In Lima, there's religious characters all over the place, and so I started photographing the statues of Virgin Mary and Jesus. And before I knew it, I had 20, 30, 40, 50 images that all fit in this theme. So then you have a collection that can become part of an exhibit or a book or something more. If you run around with a single image that's not part of something bigger, it doesn't have as much value in my opinion. And I think the Everyday Project is an example of that. My pictures of everyday life in Lima, okay, they're sometimes interesting and pretty, but when you put them in the context of pictures of everyday life from all over Latin America, their importance just grows. So I think that's important to remember in all of our work, be it technology work, design, photography, that when you can plug into something bigger than the individual work you're doing, your potential for impact also grows considerably. I don't have to probably tell you in this room, but experiment with technology. Things like the attachment that's on this camera here, that's a wide-angle lens attachment. I always tell people to not be afraid to experiment with technology. I'm not the best example, but I think it's good to try new lenses, see how you like it. Play with the remote triggers that you can use to put your cell phones in other sides of the room. You can play with more advanced post-processing. For me, most of my pictures I'll put straight into Instagram. So my process is fairly simple. I'll take a picture with my phone, I'll open it in Instagram, and my favorite two filters are Amaro and X Pro 2, but I use others sometimes as well. And sometimes I use Snapseed. So Snapseed is a downloadable app that you can use to adjust color and focus and sharpness and contrast. A lot of the same things you can do with your in-phone editors, with Instagram. But Snapseed is a little bit more specific. You can lighten just a little area of a face, for example, and just fine-tune things a little bit more. So those are the two things I use. After this, I would love to hear more about what you guys are using and maybe try some new things myself, try some new apps, try some new techniques. I encourage you to find your style. I'm still looking for it. I think it's a process for everyone, but you only find it by experimenting and trying new things. And share, because if I take all these pictures and I keep them to myself and I'm afraid to share them with anyone, then what, right? Then what? Then maybe they don't even matter. Maybe they only matter to me. Maybe that's enough. But I really encourage you to share and to use hashtags to connect to communities that care about the same things that you care about. And find ways to plug into projects that contribute to something that you care about. It can be scary, you know. Comments online can be really nasty, but sometimes they can also be really positive. Hashtags can help you connect to people. And engage with others whose work you like too. So when you're on Instagram, it's not just about sharing your own work and using hashtags. It's about going and seeing other people's work too and learning from that. looking at the hashtags that they use. And I encourage you to find more ways to collaborate with people you wouldn't typically collaborate with. So maybe here in the room you guys are used to collaborating with each other, but try to find ways to collaborate with people who may not necessarily live in the same city as you or the same country as you, because technology makes that possible. You guys know that as well as anyone. I'm going to share a few pictures that I've taken during my last week in Romania, so you can see how I view your country. This was on my hotel balcony, and this woman over here, I don't know if you can see her, was taking her morning cigarette, and I loved her reflection in the window. The streets of Bucharest. I got to hear the orchestra. This is in Rikish. And this picture I show you because it has a story behind it that I think we can all learn from. So I'm out in the field a lot, and I'm always talking to people, convincing them to let me sleep at their house for a week or spend a lot of time with them. And that might be very uncomfortable for you guys, maybe not, but when you work in an office and you're in front of a desk a lot, I think that becomes a lot more comfortable than going out and knocking on doors and spending time with strangers. So I just show this picture to share a really small anecdote. This was in Transylvania, and I talked earlier about how we can use our phone to connect to people, to start conversations. And so when I was walking by the window, I thought, wow, that would make a good picture. It was just the woman. But I wasn't sure if she felt comfortable. If I photographed her, I don't speak Romanian. What am I supposed to do? I can like take the shot quickly and run. And if she gets mad, okay. I could not take the picture, you know. All these things are going through your head. And I think sometimes the inclination is to just be afraid and not take the picture, or maybe to snap the picture and make it look like you're taking a selfie so she doesn't know. So I decided not to do those things. I decided to ask her, but I don't speak Romanian. So I was walking with another woman in the village. She was to my right, and I pointed at her and I showed her picture. I had taken this woman's picture previously, and I said, thumbs up, you know, I'm using my hands, I'm using my body. It's too easy to make excuses that you can't ask because you don't speak the language. You have so many other tools to communicate with people in the world. So she quickly understood my message, and she said, of course, take a picture. Then the man came to the window and they looked at me and they smiled. And this brief little moment, I felt so happy, and they smiled and I smiled, and their friend laughed, and she felt helpful and useful. And so in my stories, a lot of times I spend a lot of time with people, but these little moments of connection don't have to be so long and deep. They can be a few moments. But those few moments will ripple, because here I am talking about this couple today. And maybe they're at home telling the story about the strange foreigner who took their picture the other day. And those stories will live on over and over and over again. And the next time I'm afraid to take someone's picture, I'm going to remember this, and I'm going to be more brave. I'm going to be more confident to ask or to somehow interact with a person and to take their picture, because yeah, sometimes people don't like their picture photographed. You can kind of take cues sometimes, but more often than not, people like to be seen. They like to be heard. And if you approach them, even just like a small smile, or like I said, thumbs up, picture, okay, you'd be surprised at how many people actually invite you in and want you to take that picture. So that's my Transylvanian story. And to go with that, I do believe that your cell phone can bring you closer to others. We probably more often than not use it as a barrier. It's the thing we look at in the elevator to avoid a conversation with someone that we don't know, to avoid a conversation with a waiter so we don't feel like a loser when we're sitting at a restaurant alone. This is how we often use it, but we can really use it to create meaningful connections. And again, I'll expand that and say that I believe the same is true of technology. I'll mention one project that my friend has worked on that's really cool. It's a group called Shared Studios. And so they use technology portals to, their mission statement, I'll read here, is to create meaningful connections across all forms of distance. So what they have is screens containers, tents, they're spaces where they project life-size versions of people and they talk in real time. So they've used this technology not just to connect, a mother and a daughter or these simple things, but for example, to connect President Barack Obama when he was president with kids in a refugee camp in Iraq. So suddenly Obama is learning firsthand from refugee kids in Iraq about their experience, and he's hopefully using that information to inform his policy. And so this is just one example of what could be considered a simple technology, but can, again, affect layers and layers and layers of experience and lives. So it's just one small example that I believe the cell phone can bring us closer. I believe technology can, but it can also be used to separate us. So I think we need to be careful how we use technology. So with that said, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, or also hear about some of your own experiences with cell phone photography or your own design and tech skills. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Can you define for us what is multimedia storytelling as a platform for storytelling? So what do you understand with multimedia storytelling?
To me, multimedia, when I think of multimedia journalism, I think of something web-based that includes multiple senses. So hearing and seeing, for example, or hearing and reading, if it makes sense. A more immersive experience, something that tries to put you in the place of where the person who's telling the story was. I don't know that that's a technical definition, but that's my sense.
Usually, how do you decide to use how much video, how much photo?
Yeah.
I mean, which is your opinion about this?
Yeah. So
when do you start a storytelling? A story. How do you decide? Okay, I'll use video, I'll use photo.
Yeah, so I always say that the content should dictate if you use it or not. So for example, I would never be at a newspaper and say, we need to do video, what's the story? It goes the other direction. So you start with the story idea and then you say, does this lend itself to video? And to me, there are two big elements that you look for, what makes a good video. And I think that emotion and motion are the two things that can make a good video. So when a video can take me to a place that words alone can't, that a picture can't. So obviously if your story is about a dancer, video is an obvious choice, right? Because how can you can describe beautifully how a person dances. I don't want to take away from the power of words, but when you see a person dance in a video, there's a different connection. Same with emotion. The same sentence you can read in print and interpret and feel one emotion. Maybe the person didn't deliver it with the emotion you're feeling. So you're putting a subjective filter on the sentence and the quote, even if it's exactly what the person said. And so to hear the person's voice, so that can happen with video or just audio as well, gives you a sense of emotion that I think sometimes you don't get when you just have a quote alone. So I think motion and emotion to repeat are the two things that make a good video. I don't think you should just do video or audio for the sake of doing it because it's a new tool and it's fancy and it sells ads on your website. I really think that the content needs to dictate it. And you need somewhat comfortable and expressive people in video stories and audio stories. Yes, you can tell a video story in 5 minutes with someone with a very monotone voice, but you also need to keep the attention of the people. And so how do you edit that in a way that keeps it moving? And so there are a lot of choices you make when finding the right character to deliver your story if you're doing a video that you don't have to think about when you're writing. Yeah, you still need a really important character, but you can have a very strong protagonist that has a very monotone, boring voice, and they can shine through in words much faster, I think, and easier than they might in video.
What is the one assignment you would make us do that we could do over the next few days that could sort of push the way we take pictures? I mean, I took pictures all over the space, but it's the same picture everyone takes when they walk into this office. So if you were to give an assignment to all of us, what would you push us to photograph?
Yeah.
That's one. And two, from your time in Romania over the past week, if you were to come back in your official capacity as a photojournalist, what stories would you try to tell? What has sparked your interest?
Okay. So to answer good questions, the first question, I think that this place has a lot of creativity and talent in it. Like you feel it when you walk in the door, and it's shiny and beautiful. But I feel like there's a lot more to the story than like what I see when I walk in or the pictures on your website. One example of this is when Mircea made a sketch of how the setup would be for the talk today. And those sketches were so cool to me. And as someone on the outside who wants to understand, like, what does Lateral do? Like, seeing that sketch would have given me some insight into what you do. So it's not always like showing this polished side, but sometimes showing the work in progress, how the work is made, how you get there. And so I would encourage you to think about what that is for you here at Lateral. What are the little things that give you inspiration? How do you visualize your creative process? How do you show that to me visually? That's a little abstract, but I think that you could share that. And I think people like these little quirky surprises or these vulnerabilities or these imperfections. So, for example, if you're a coder and when you're really frustrated with something, I don't know, maybe you pace around the middle of the room, show me your feet and tell me about 12 hours at my desk, have to make this happen, pacing 3 laps to get to the end. Like, whoa, that's kind of cool. You know, like these little, it's like you feel like you're giving people secrets into what you do. And it's a lot more interesting to me than, I don't know, if you're speaking your coding language to each other. I just kind of feel left out because it doesn't make sense to me. So that would be one suggestion. So to sum that up, the assignment would be, give me some sort of insight about your creative process and how you do your work here at Lateral and what makes the way you do your work unique. So try to put that into a picture or a series of pictures. You can do this also with emotions. Like, imagine if you always feel frustrated, or imagine if you always feel tired, or you can convey those feelings in pictures through light and color, all the things we talked about. So that's the assignment. I hope you all do it. And the second question is a tough one because I followed a lot of immigration stories, and because I've been based in Turkey the last almost 3 years, I'm actually quite interested in Turkey. A lot of people are talking about now refugees are being sent actually to Romania on boats. They're being told, so someone say wants to go to France or the EU, and they go to a smuggler, and the smuggler promises them EU, and the person is from Iraq, for example, and they say, but I want to go to France. Okay, I don't know if I can get to France. I promise you EU. And what's happened in a few of these cases, as we know from some articles actually last week, is that these immigrants are being put, most often refugees, are being put on boats and promised the EU, and they don't know exactly where they are, and suddenly they're in Romania. And because it's not Schengen, getting from Romania into a place like Germany or France where they had originally hoped to go is a lot more difficult, and will then require another smuggler and thousands of more dollars. So that story is interesting to me. I don't know, on the Turkey side, people are talking a lot more about it than on the Romanian side. So I'm curious to watch that over the next few months and see if that's actually coming to an end or if that's actually going to increase. I'm not sure. So that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. So you were talking about stereotypes at one point. This is a thing that's really important to grasp upon these stereotypes, especially if you're traveling. You said that you were moving from one place to another, and you have these specific stereotypes about people in general, about how things are going on, how safe it is and not if you're traveling. Did you encounter these stereotypes, and maybe you had some surprises, both good and bad? Did you have, for instance, a place where you had really bad stereotyping about, I don't know, people or safety or stuff like this, and it turned out to be the other way? Or a different place which is you don't have to worry about, it's a general safe area, people are friendly or whatever, and you had the exact opposite? Yeah. And does this influence maybe your future travels to that place or to different places about stereotyping?
Yeah,
in regard to stereotyping, sorry.
It happens all the time, and it's a great question where of course, the way we make sense of a place when we don't know it is through the stereotypes, because it's what we find when we Google a place. So before I travel to a place, even some of the pictures I took of Romania, I find quite stereotypical. You know, the old woman and her cane with this. Stereotypes are also born out of realities, right? So they exist for a reason, but they're not always I guess you could say, the most important part of the culture. They're the easiest to see or the fastest we use to make sense of things. But they're a sliver of the reality in most places. And so all the time I try to be aware of my stereotypes, to remind myself of what they are and how they affect the questions I ask. Like, am I not asking this question because I know this person is very conservative and it might offend them, or am I not asking this for another reason? And I really, really try to be aware of my stereotypes. I can give an example. You asked for a story. So I was in a small village in Afghanistan, very conservative, and I was sitting with the imam in the village, who is the highest religious leader in this village. And we were talking about God, and he asked me about my religion. And in Afghanistan, you're required by law to cover your head. So I was dressed like any of the women there. So visually, he can't tell, but he assumes that because I'm from the outside, perhaps I'm not Muslim. And so he asks me about my religion, and of course, you're sitting next to the imam, you're kind of nervous. It would just be easier to say, yeah, I'm Muslim, you know, over, move on. But instead, like, I said something, I was raised Catholic, but I believe this, but I'm not sure. And I just admitted all my general kind of doubt and confusion about religion often that I have, and I was really honest with him. And he asked if he could pray with me after it. He held my hand and he told me that I was so insightful and that his beliefs weren't that different than mine. And so this really surprised me, and it came from a point of me just being honest with someone who intimidated me, and I was really surprised by how he reacted to me. And there's moments like that all the time, you know, all the time. I could, if I really sit here and think about it, I can come up with so many more examples of what we think about a person is not true. More often than not, I think people act against the stereotype, to be honest. I think stereotypes are just fears that keep us from trusting and connecting and being honest with ourselves and the things around us, you know. I'm trying to think if there's ever been a moment where I let my guard down, and I shouldn't have, but I can't think of one where I felt too safe, for example, in a place that was supposed to be safe but wasn't. Nothing comes to mind.
Was there a moment for you that you would say that before you were a person with a phone that took pictures, and after that you became a photographer or a photojournalist?
I remember I took a film photography course in high school, and so the assignments were kind of like the typical photography courses. You start off, you know, with your black and white film and take a still life, photograph an apple, photograph shadows, shape, these very simple compositionally driven assignments. And then we had a photojournalism assignment. And so this was when I was 17, and I still wasn't sure what I was going to study at university. And we had an assignment that was to photograph people. And after that assignment, I decided to study journalism. So it wasn't such a defining moment, but it just felt so good to me to talk to people, to actually... Some people love portraiture and staged photography and the ability to control every element of a picture, you know, to put the light just perfect and all this. But for me, I loved in photojournalism was, I was just not the producer. I was just there to document what was happening the best I could in a way that would take that moment and transport it somewhere else. And I couldn't recreate it. I just had to do the best I could with this moment and move on. I think that it would be really hard for me, like I would just obsess. I would never take one picture or be happy with it if I controlled everything in the picture, if it makes sense. And that's what I loved. The difference, it felt freeing to have control over a certain part of the process. And the other part of the process was completely in the control of the person I was following, the person I was documenting. And so that was the moment for me. And it's funny because it was kind of like it happened a second time with my cell phone. You know, it happened with that film camera back in high school, but after I quit taking pictures of my coffee for my mom, well, I actually still do that, but you know, there was this process of when I started using the phone to take pictures of people too, and it was that same feeling that I had in high school now that I think about it. So Thank you for the question and for helping me to have that reflection.
You had something. You said something about having a certain style that you're still developing it.
Yeah.
But is there something similar to a signature that you, for instance, when you look at your own pictures, you kind of start feeling them. You know that it's okay. It's something I did. Even if a different person takes the same picture, you know it's his and this is yours.
Yeah.
And do you have maybe like something specific that you can immediately recognize that this is your picture and not somebody else's, or something? For instance, I don't know, maybe the angle, the height, the coloring, or something in this idea.
I don't think I have that yet in my photography. I really feel like most of my work, kind of by chance and just by the assignments I've gotten, has become more in film. And I feel that I have more of a developed style in film, actually. You know, people will come to me to make a film because they say, I want you to take this issue and make it human, you know, like that would be my signature in film, you know, just making an issue really focused on one person and trying to make it emotional. And the idea is if I can make you care about this person, I can make you interested in an issue you didn't care about before. But in photography, I feel like it's something that I've had a goal and an intention in my mind to do more photography, even if it's not commissioned work over the next few years. So I think it's something I still want to work on developing. Definitely, because I feel often too a separation, like when I shoot an assignment for a magazine and there's certain pictures I need to get, or for a newspaper, it looks very different than my Instagram pictures. Yeah. And at least to me, and I wish I could make my journalistic documentation like transmit more emotion and feeling, something that I feel actually more comfortable doing with the cell phone. So I'm still working on merging it all.
There are not so many black and white photos in your Instagram feed. Why is that? I mean,
Are
it's
there
a deliberate
any?
decision, or
The world is colorful and full of color.
do you need color?
I like to show people the world as I see it.
Okay.
And I see it full of color.
Okay.
I appreciate black and white photography. Do I have any black and white pictures on my feed?
I don't think
Maybe.
so.
I'm gonna have to check.
Yeah. How do you stand out, Elie? I mean, especially in today's world, I mean, everybody takes a photo in 2 seconds, and there are so many on Instagram. How do you stand out? Okay, excluding hashtags and
Yeah.
certain style and...
Yeah. I think, going back to a lot of the things I mentioned, just showing me the same thing in a different way. I think captions are really important. Letting people know where the picture was taken, what the context is, or providing some sort of reflection on the moment you share. I think that words and pictures can work really beautifully together. I get really frustrated when I see a picture and there's no information about where it was or what it means to the person.
Do you add stories to your Instagram? I don't remember. Do you add stories to your photos?
I have stories. Yeah. You mean Instagram stories or?
Yes, copy. Text.
Oh, you mean the actual text? I mean, I always write a small caption. Sometimes I'll put a quote. Sometimes I'll write just like some feelings that come to mind, like in a more kind of poetic-y way. Just depends on my mood. But I always make sure in the hashtag at very least that there's the city in the country where the picture is taken. I don't write journalistic captions, who, what, where, when, why, with all my Instagram photos.
So we were told at the beginning of the talk that we should ask about the moment that changed your life. And I just remember that.
So I did a story about a Syrian refugee, and he was living in Turkey for 2 years, and he moved to Norway. And I documented his journey from Turkey to Norway. And 5 months after he got to Norway, we started dating. So he's been my boyfriend for 2 years. So this cell phone might find you your future mate or something even better. You never know. So stories do change your lives. I talked a lot at the conference about how I was always so focused on maybe trying to make lives of other people better with my stories. And really, my reflection was always that, and going back to your question, my stories have always been about my own prejudices and my own stereotypes and throwing myself into them to get past them, to learn from them. And so I realized in the end my stories were as much about changing myself as, wanting to really change your life and make it better. And yeah, then that became very obvious to me when I found love through a story.
How do you avoid any political attachment to your photos? I mean,
Political attachment?
Yes, you live in Turkey. You lived in Turkey, and
Yeah.
we all know EU and Turkey have a turbulent relation. I mean, and how do you avoid that?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I don't cover a lot of daily news or protests, those quick news things. Really, I'm kind of telling, often I think of it like the story behind the story, or the story, you know, the behind the scenes story, often in the homes, or, well, with Instagram, of course, it's mostly just street photography, so it's kind of like, you can take a political message from my picture if you want. I'm just showing you what's there, and you can interpret it. But I'm not going to put some slogan for a political party ever on my Instagram. I promise you that. I'm just going to show you what's there and how I see it, and you can take the interpretation that you want from it.
Any filters you use? I know you told us raw photography. It's the best. Raw.
No. So my favorite Instagram ones were Amaro and X Pro 2.
Okay.
But you know, in Instagram, you can kind of dial down the strength of the filter with the slider, and usually I don't use them at full strength. I mean, I like my picture to pop and have contrast and all that, but I also like it to look, you know, kind of like what I saw with my eye, as close to what I saw with my eye as possible. So if it's sunny and I'm seeing the colors very saturated, then I want my picture to look like what I saw with my eyes. Sometimes, obviously, use filters just to reinforce a feeling, you know, so you're adding warmth or you're adding something. But usually, yeah, Amaro, X Pro 2, and at about 60%.
Have you been trying to alter the lens? I mean, using stupid stuff like a piece of glass, or, I mean, trying to interpose something between your cell phone and the subject?
I haven't. There was a really cool project on it. It wasn't with the cell phone, but it was with SLRs, where there was an essay shot through like curtains, and it was called Behind the Veil, and it was of Muslim women. And so it was this whole idea of seeing through like a curtain or a piece of fabric that I thought was like really successful. So I think those things are cool when they help reinforce the content or a message, right? And they're not just a gimmick. Kind of like the same thing, like don't do a video just to do a video. But I've never really put anything. I might have put a colored gel over my lens before. I think when I was shooting a bar to make it all red, something like that. But no, I usually haven't played much with lens attachments or filters. I've also used for the light, I've used the tinfoil trick. So I've used tinfoil and I've used metal bowls as reflectors. So if you put someone next to a window and it's sunny outside and you take a metal like solid bowl, you can make the sun hit the bowl and pop into their face. You might blind them, but you'll have like really nice light. So I've played more with that kind of stuff, the improvisation.
Do you have a camera, or are you making photos only with your phone?
So my Instagram account, all the pictures are with the cell phone, but when I'm shooting in the field for clients, I use, So I used to have a camera like that, and I actually just sold it, and so I'm now shooting with a smaller mirrorless camera. It's a Fuji. So I just switched over like a month ago to that smaller size, and so far I like it, but I feel a little uncomfortable. Somehow you feel like if you have something smaller, you can't do as much, but it's against everything I believe, so I keep reminding myself of that. And I'm about to go do my first photo assignment on Sunday, actually, with just the Fuji and one lens that I have, and trying to trust that that's going to work out. So. But then when I shoot video, I'm shooting with a cinema camera, so that's the Canon C100, and it uses the same lens that this camera here does. So I still have the big setup for the films.
What do you think about selfies?
Selfies. Well, there are some Instagram accounts that are pure selfies. I don't appreciate them much. I take selfies sometimes. I admit it. Usually with groups and cool friends and nice people. I'm curious, who here uses Instagram? Who has an Instagram account? So a few of you. And I'm curious, like, how many of those who have an Instagram account are posting daily? Anyone? Ish? Weekly? monthly? How many of you have an account and never post anything? Really?
I have 2 accounts.
Why don't you post anything?
Well, I just created it. I don't know why.
Well, you should post your first picture today.
Maybe. I wanted to ask something. So, some tips about what should you photograph. So I always come home, the same things happen. Maybe some cat does something funny, I photograph it, but usually I just don't have what to photograph, so yeah.
Well, your routine might not be interesting to you because you do it all the time, but it might be really interesting to me to see how you live. So first remember that. And then secondly, try to see what happens to you every day in a new way. So like when I went to Peru, I even photographed my coffee because I was in this new country, in this new place, and everything was different. But I could look at my coffee that way at my home too, you know? Why don't we? Because it's so familiar to us. But try to imagine somehow, maybe it'll take a little bit of creativity, but like imagine that that's not your cat, and imagine you're in a new place and this is some weird exotic cat and you need to show somebody. I mean, you know, try to just see it through fresh eyes as much as you can, because yeah, maybe it's not interesting to you, but over time if you started just taking a picture of your cat and then your food and then how your mom cooks, or you know, how your friends get from one place to another, then I'm going to start seeing like how your life is in Romania, and this might be really interesting to me. Maybe I have Romanian ancestors and I'm on Instagram looking at the hashtag life in Romania to see what life is like here, and now you've showed me that. So it's cool, right? I mean, you might never know what your pictures do for other people. They may never tell you, but you won't know anything if you don't like throw them out into the sea and see what happens, right? So the first thing is to start taking pictures. The second is to share them. And the third is to just be patient and wait. And if you enjoy it, keep doing it, you know? Thank you all for being here.